We are back with another Ramped Careers daily update. Today, I am joined with both co-founders, Mitch and Manoj. Guys, how you doing?
Doing well, Danny. Doing well. Happy Friday Eve.
Happy Friday Eve indeed. We're cruising through the week this week. It feels like this one flew by.
Yeah, it has been for sure.
So we want to jump right into our topic for today. It's a meaty one and we all have opinions. We're trying to come to some conclusion on it. I know we were talking before the episode, but it's, should SDRs be the one qualifying leads, or should they just be booking meetings for AEs and letting the AEs kind of run with it? So Mitch, I know you share some thoughts with me about your perspective, both playing in and from a high level viewing the SDR and the AE relationship. So why don't you take it from here? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to set the context a little bit more, I think the debate or discussion is around, should SDRs be qualifying through the whole BANT, MEDIC, ANUM type of qualification standards, or are they simply setting up a meeting with a company and maybe a prospect that meets your ICP and then passing it to the AE to figure out things like timeline, budget, need, kind of the more meaty qualification standards? I see both sides of this. I think obviously it's always contextual on where your company's at, what stage they're at, what type of product you're selling, but maybe we'll just provide some light onto the pros and cons of each. So I'll start with the pros here. The pros, I think, are you can stuff the top of the funnel. If the SDRs are less worried about, is this a perfect lead? Am I going to get comped on this if it doesn't meet their timeline or budget? Then I think they will be more focused on just getting quality conversations with companies that meet their ICP. That's the key there. The list has to be qualified, right? So you don't want them just calling into like the Fortune 100 if you only sell to SMBs. So the list that they're calling on becomes the key to all of this. But assuming that the list is qualified, then it's the SDR's job just to crank through that list, set up as many meetings as possible with whatever means possible and whatever it takes. And then the AE, who in theory is more experienced and knows the product inside and out and should be able to navigate those conversations a little bit better, it's on the AE, dig for pain, to generate the need, the want, qualifying timelines, budget, stuff like that. So I think the big pro is top of funnel should increase in theory.
Yeah, so I think you're right there. That makes sense from a lever perspective. What I'm curious to know and what I've seen is when I'm managing sales teams and when I'm thinking about hiring SDRs versus AEs, I want to make it as easy as possible for the deals that come in or leads that come in through our pipeline to be closed as effectively and as efficiently as possible. What I love about SDRs is you load them up with leads and you give them a target and they will charge hard at achieving that target. If you want them to qualify leads more effectively with some sort of framework in place, making that deal as easy as possible for the AE, it requires an extra layer of training. So that's really where my consideration is. If your organization is equipped to work an extra layer of training, and by that I mean properly train an SDR on how to qualify, what questions they need to ask, what they're looking for on any individual deal, how they go about asking tough questions about pain and potentially budget, authority, need, timeline, then I think you're well equipped as an organization, or you're able as an organization to allow your AE or allow your SDRs, unlock your SDRs to run proper qualification. If you don't have that in place, it may just be better to have them just hustle on meetings and give it to your closers who should be in theory trained on qualification, because that's where they are in their career.
And I don't think, Danny, I've seen an organization that has trained, including when I was a sales manager, that completely trained an SDR on how to do that well. In my experience as an AE, I rather have those conversations. I rather give me the meeting, let me qualify them, let me generate the pain, because that's so much of the sales process is that first conversation, digging for pain, finding the actual problem you can solve. And I don't think that most SDRs are equipped to do it.
Yeah, I think to add to it, there are a couple of instances where having the AEs qualify in the conventional sense would make sense, right? One is if you got to a point as a business where you refined your sales process so much so that, let's take BANT as a framework, you know that having a good targeted list or a list of target accounts with certain titles will automatically solve for the authority question, right? So you've done this, you've seen it enough that you know that if there's a VP of sales you're targeting, they automatically have authority because you have historical evidence to kind of indicate otherwise. You've done enough research that you know that if a company has a headcount of 50 to 200 people, there's certainly clearly a need. And that comes from historical evidence. If you've gotten to that point, then I think having a very good prospect list in and of itself will solve some of your qualification hassles, right? Because you've solved for need, you've solved for authority. You may even have solved for budget, depending on the size of the company and other characteristics that you have. And if all that's left is timing, that's something that can very well be done during a call that an AE takes with prospect. Another way of looking at it is if your SDR is able to set up a meeting, isn't that to some extent indicative of timing? As in, why would someone that has absolutely no need for it in foreseeable future, and let's call foreseeable future the next month to 6 months, right? So 2 quarters. Like, why would a prospect take any time if there's simply no need for that solution, that product, that service? And so I think that for certain companies, it might make sense. Maybe it's a question of having a really good targeted list. Another scenario where you might be better off just having the AE handle qualification is if you're an early stage company, you haven't really fully nailed your ICP. What's the point in having the SDRs go through a list of qualification questions that is simply iterative, that you have to redo over and over again? At that point, you might as well want to stuff the top of your funnel, have as many conversations as possibly can, just so you can find a quicker path to success, right? So I think there are certain specific cases, early stage companies, it's not the worst thing if you have an AE qualifies. Have a good top of the funnel, take as many meetings and learn from the process. Or if you're a late stage company and you already have a rich history of customer interactions, then you really don't need the SDR to do much of the qualification. Maybe your prospect list will do it. Question to both of you is, if you're having the SDRs, not go through this additional step, how do you think about compensation for the SDRs? At that point, should you just pay them a good base salary and track their performance on a rolling month basis and see how many meetings they're setting and leave it at that? Because they're not doing any of the qualification. They're not doing any of the higher touch sales processes. Should they just get a base salary and then do their work?
Before we jump into that, I do want to push back on one thing you mentioned because I do think it's important. So I've seen countless examples, and I can't tell you how frustrating this is as a manager or even a salesperson, of folks that come through this funnel, the SDR pipeline, and say, I want to speak with somebody right now. And from a qualification perspective, timeline isn't actually qualified. It's just they want to see a cool product. They're bored. Again, they're bored as hell at work. They're sitting there looking for new technology and they're just kind of scoping it out. So I wouldn't necessarily think that jumping on the phone with somebody is a checkbox for timing. I think you actually have to explicitly qualify that out, which kind of balancing what you said and what Mitch said here is, when I think about this, like, I've only seen really one example of a team that's run at pretty high level of qualification that I've managed, and that's the Thanks team back in the day. But we were only qualifying authority and need. We weren't even getting the full budget or timeline out of the prospect. We were leaving that up to the AE. We stripped that away a little bit to make the process a little more fluid. So I'm kind of leaning, let the SDRs just do meetings. And then to segue into your next question about compensation, I think you got to just keep it still as simple as possible and leave it on booked meetings. But I would have some kicker for quality there and make sure that quality is in place. Something like a % of deals closed, a very small % of deals closed, or deals closed within X time period, get some extra %. So some time bound thing that allows the SDR to see that big view of what a quality lead coming through the sales process looks like. I don't know, Mitch, what do you think there?
I'd definitely keep it still base plus compensation, or base plus, some sort of quota for total compensation there. The reason being, like, that's why most folks go into sales, right? So they can control their own destiny, make as much money as possible. And I think that most sales folks, whether right out of college or they've been in it for 40 years, they thrive off that. So I keep it that way. I like your idea, Danny, of throwing in some sort of kicker for quality, whether that's deals closed or deals closed in a time period. And I like your point, Danny, a second ago, where you mentioned maybe there's like a hybrid approach where the SDRs are doing part of the qualification. Hopefully that's come through in the quality of the list already. Like Manoj said, with the ICP, the buyer personas you're targeting, hopefully those indicate a good fit to begin with. And then maybe the SDR is just qualifying on, slightly on need or slightly on authority, whatever it is. At the end of the day, I think they should be the one that is running with the ball for the majority of the sales cycle.
They're the trained assassin, right? They've come through the ranks of being an SDR. They know the drill. They know how to qualify. They've been trained on the product. They've been trained on the personas, the pain points. So it's probably best left in their court. Those are all good points. So let's play devil's advocate as a group. What are the downsides? What are the limiting factors that say, okay, no, AEs should actually be the ones just focusing on qualified deals. SDRs should be fully in control qualification.
Essentially, the downside is you get a bunch of leads coming to the top of the funnel that are just complete garbage. And then you have an AE sitting there that that could be demoing prospects or could be closing deals, sitting there on 30-minute intro calls, talking to, somebody who's never going to buy, who's never going to be able to get you in front of someone who can buy. And then your calendar's just full of crap meetings. So that's obviously one of the really big downsides, because then you get frustrated AEs, you get slow pipeline movements, and then it's just a waste of everyone's time.
Do you think that there's a way to, I don't know, maybe automate this qualification process where someone sets a meeting, but then I don't know what the response rate would be, automated messages that goes from, the AE or the SDR, we're in the process of customizing the demo for you, answer these 3 questions, this will help guide the conversation, and you do this as an additional sequence, right? Maybe it's 2 emails that will precede a demo, and you try to collect that information that way, right? Instead of asking them during the demo, right? A simple question that even has, when do you plan on purchasing something like this? In a month, 2 months, 3 months? I don't know. I'm wondering if there's a way that you can ask these questions and be a little less disruptive, understanding that not everyone's going to fill a form, but if it looks like an NPS survey and it's very simple, easy to fill, under the umbrella of this is to help us customize the demo, a bit of maybe half the people will give you that information.
I think so much of the selling motion is not tipping your hand, right? The prospect doesn't want to feel like they're being sold. And sometimes in those early conversations, you are teasing out the qualification pieces of the puzzle, but you're simultaneously selling the prospect on why you should have the next conversation. Especially if you're a startup, especially if you're a new company that no one knows who you are, all those early conversations, you're building trust, you're building rapport, you're like pulling the prospect in slowly into being sold. Hopefully you're doing that in a way that the prospect doesn't realize that what you're doing, and they just think that, hey, we're here as a consultant trying to help you. So I see both sides.
This way a couple of times, and maybe we can kind of wrap up after that. On some calls, I felt that I was grilled a little bit even before I get to see the product or the demo, right? Where I've been asked questions around company size, revenue, transaction volume, who are your banking partners, all of this even before I get to see the product. And I just got a little bit irritated, and I'm thinking, why should I divulge all of this information to you? I barely know you. There's no trust building. There's no easy way of doing it. Wondering where, if that's the right forum. And, maybe it's a function of too much qualification up front, but I think you do have a point. If it's straightforward and simple, you could just as easily ask that in an initial phone call. And if it's complicated, you do it later.
Maybe I think it all has to do with tailoring it to the prospect and giving them value. So if they think they're going to gain value from those questions, then it helps. And last point here is maybe it's different between inbound and outbound leads, right? If you come inbound, then you are looking for something and maybe you're more open to answering those questions. Versus outbound, it's like, out of the blue.